the furor over the IRS investigations of conservative groups over the last few years continues, now with the Obama administration finally taking some sort of action, and as you would probably expect, the GOP is not satisfied by what he's doing. So if you, by some chance, have missed what actually has been going on with the IRS, effectively the 501c4 organizations, the ones that can engage in some sort of social welfare activity but can't be strictly political organizations, have to be evaluated in many different ways by the IRS. And apparently, if you believe people like, again, the IRS, they've been engaging in those evaluations in an incredibly political fashion. So some groups like the Tea Party groups that say something about opposing the current government, groups that support Israel, there's various code words that the IRS was looking for, were delayed in their applications to get the 501c4 status for up to 27 months. And the paperwork requirements that they had to fulfill were, in some cases, really bizarre, and it would be difficult for any organization, especially one that's cash-strapped, to achieve, like giving resumes for every single member of the organization, giving projections of expenses going out years, and things like that. Now, we'll get into why this might be a good thing in some ways, but it certainly hasn't been going well for Barack Obama. And yesterday, he made clear that he was actually going to do something about this, take some sort of action. We have a quote from him. He said, "I've directed Secretary Lew," that's the Secretary of Treasury, "to hold those responsible for these failures accountable and to make sure that each of the Inspector General's recommendations are implemented quickly so that such conduct never happens again." And now we find out today that the acting director of the IRS, Stephen Miller, has resigned. So at least one person has been placed on the chopping block. Whether or not Steve Miller was in any way involved in this, we don't yet know because the investigation is currently ongoing. Now, he was the acting director, so you would imagine that he would have knowledge of it, but that isn't immediately clear. Obama had a quote in reference to why he decided to axe Stephen Miller. He says, "It is important to institute new leadership that can help restore confidence going forward." Now, we'll talk a little bit later about the chances that this actually will restore confidence. I'm not optimistic right now. But let's see, was this move by Obama, the sacking of the head of the IRS, is this going to placate the Republicans? We have some quotes from John Boehner. He was videotaped talking about this. Let's find out if he's satisfied.
The IRS has admitted to targeting conservatives, even if the White House continues to be stuck on the word if. Now, my question isn't about who's going to resign. My question is, who's going to jail over this scandal?
I don't want someone's job, I want someone's blood. So he's expected to say something like this. The GOP, especially members of the House, are not happy with what's going on, and they want to get maximum political benefit out of this scandal. So we lost Stephen Miller. I imagine the others will lose their jobs in the next few days and in the next few weeks. But he's looking far beyond just people losing their jobs. They should be going to jail. Now, let's bear in mind that we're not talking about Benghazi here, okay? We're not talking about people losing their lives. We're not even talking about the investigation of journalists by the Department of Justice, where it seems like clearly crimes were committed. Here, we're talking about, at worst, extreme inconveniences to political groups that, as I will talk about later, are probably abusing their IRS status as it is. Nobody died as a result of what the IRS did. So the idea that people should necessarily go to jail seems like overreaching by me, or as far as I'm concerned. But that's currently where they're at. Also, by the way, we didn't just lose the acting director of the IRS today. Eric Holder was grilled. He, I'm sure, is looking forward to getting out from under this IRS mess. But let's talk about why this scandal is important and why it's being conducted in the way it is, especially in the media. So the first step of this is pretty obvious, I think. This is as political a scandal as could go on, both for the people who engaged in the scandal at the IRS and also the politicians and the members of the media who are currently discussing it. The idea that this really matters in some sort of lingering or durable sense, that just strikes me as completely false. What we have is the GOP, who's in some way rightly inconvenienced and annoyed at the fact that their organizations or organizations that support them have been inconvenienced, but they're basically just trying to stick it to Obama. I think everybody pretty much understands that. Now, secondly, we knew from the start, from the first indication that the IRS had been involved in something inappropriate, that Obama was going to buckle. It's his go-to move. We knew it was going to happen. Now, the question as it stands is the sacking of Stephen Miller, is that as far as he's going to buckle? How far up, I guess, the chain of command will this go? Now, he's not exactly a fighter when it comes to most issues outside of maybe student loans and gay marriage and things like that. So I expect that we will see more people lose their jobs. The idea that there will be criminal investigations, I don't know if we'll see that. But I guess we'll have to wait and find out. The IRS is investigating these groups because they want the 501c4 status. And we know from the last couple of elections that many of the organizations that have that current tax code status have at the very least abused what they're supposed to be able to get up to during elections. Now, they're not supposed to be getting involved in blatantly political expenditures of money, becoming involved in campaigns and things like that, but we know that that's exactly what they're doing. Karl Rove's group does it. Many of these Tea Party organizations, they can say all they want about social welfare and how they just want to hold rallies and things like that, but we understand that underlying that is an explicitly political message. And so while I don't like how the IRS investigated these groups, it should not be just groups on the right, because there are groups on the left that are abusing this section of the tax code as well. The idea that these organizations are just victims and they've been bullied by the executive branch of the government, I think that that's extremely false. And I think that if we can have any silver lining, I suppose, out of this IRS scandal, it's that we should take a second look, a harder look at these organizations that are abusing elements of the tax code, hopefully before the next election. And finally, before we move on to the next scandal, if Barack Obama was involved in any direct way in this, if he had knowledge of the fact that the IRS was being political in how it chose which groups to investigate and how thoroughly to investigate them, this has got to be one of the most weak sauce scandals in the history of the government. I mean, they were just inconvenienced. It took longer for them to get their tax code status, or they had to fill out more paperwork. The idea that this is like the smoking gun of a tyrannical, totalitarian executive, I think that that's ridiculous. And I have to assume that despite the fact that Boehner seems like he's struck gold with this scandal and he can go up there and make the president look bad, I don't think that this is going to have much of a durable impact on the public's perception of the president. I think that they're overshooting with this, although only time will tell. And now I want to move on to place this scandal in context. We did this earlier in the week. Ben Mankiewicz did this with the scandal over Benghazi. Now we're going to do it with the IRS, so the political use of the IRS anyway. So the media narrative that's currently out there would, I believe, falsely lead you to believe that this is the first ever political use of the IRS, and Obama is innovating in some fashion when it comes to investigating his political opponents. But if you actually take a look at the political history of the United States, this could not be any farther from the truth. So we're going to be talking about James Bovard here. He's a libertarian journalist and historian who's writing recently in the Wall Street Journal. And he's done a little analysis of the political use of the IRS, and you might be surprised to find out that it's not just Obama. Hell, it's not even just George W. Bush. It stretches back more than 70 years that the IRS has been used to investigate political opponents. So we're going to jump back all the way to President Roosevelt first. Now, he apparently used the IRS to pester and to at times hamstring those who opposed the expansion of the federal government, mainly under the New Deal. Some of the particular people that were inconvenienced by the IRS during this time that you might have heard of include William Randolph Hearst, Republican Andrew Mellon, and populist Huey Long. And so both individuals and organizations that were working against the political goals of President Roosevelt were investigated by the IRS. Now, bear in mind, Democrat there. We're not just talking about Republicans. We're not just talking about Democrats. We're going to see both on this list. Let's jump forward a couple of years, a couple of decades. President Kennedy. Now, he apparently, and I had apparently missed this during all of my time in political science, was sort of an innovator when it comes to the use of the IRS. He actually was quite adept at using it to attack his political opponents. So he formed an organization called the Organizations Audit Program, which almost could not have been more explicitly designed to investigate his political opponents. Those include anti-communist organizations and also conservative groups like the American Enterprise Institute, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and the Foundation for Economic Education, which I have never heard of before in my life, but apparently historically it served some significant purpose. So that was President Kennedy, another Democrat, by the way, using the IRS in a political fashion. Let's talk about Nixon, though. You will not be surprised to find out that he also got up to some shady stuff, and it wasn't just Watergate. We also have the use of the IRS. So we have a quote. This is, again, coming from the libertarian journalist James Bovard. He says that more than 10,000 individuals and groups were targeted because of their political activism or their slant between 1969 and 1973. So in a very short period of time, that is a lot of organizations and individuals. Those include a Nobel laureate, Linus Pauling, who at the time was a critic of the Vietnam War. And also, by the way, he was not just attacking left-wingers. The far-right John Birch Society, which apparently sometimes gets up in the news lately, also was investigated by Nixon. We shouldn't be surprised about this because he was an extremely paranoid man, but he was not just using his GOP operatives, he was using the IRS as well. So from Roosevelt through Kennedy to Nixon, we're seeing this.